But before we get into the budget itself, I'd like to discuss a memo that I have provided to the board at the request of the chairperson of the Finance Committee, which you have at your place, because for the first time, Hoboken will be impacted by something we have never run into before or had the problem with, and that is what I would almost call a reverse cap. Most people are aware, if you've been following the news and the financial information in New Jersey, that over the past years we have one time had a budget cap of 4% on our total expenditures, and that was recently changed to a 2% cap on the tax levy only. Most people are not aware that there is a kind of reverse cap. There is in some cases, a minimum tax levy that you cannot go below. And we've never run into that before, but this year for the first time, with some of the planning we did and with some of the earlier drafts of the budget, we had hoped that if we got any increase at all at state aid, we might even have a significant decrease in the tax levy until all of the final downloads were in from the state on the state aid, and we became known as one of the districts that is, quote, below adequacy. And here is the concept of how that works. Every school district in the state, all 575 operating districts, are given what is called an adequacy budget by the state. It's in the state law, it's in the state aid formula, and it dictates that the commissioner has to determine what is the level of spending that every district must take care of as its local share of the tax levy in order to reach what is called an adequacy budget. The way the state calculates that is they decide upon, based on their statistical review, how many dollars must be spent per pupil to be adequate and to provide a thorough and efficient system of education. And then they weight that enrollment so that they count more money for special ed students, more money for limited English proficiency students, more money for students who have other special needs. And they eventually come up with a number for every district and say, this is what you need to spend to run a thorough and efficient system of schools. At that point, if what you are proposing for a tax levy, together with the state aid they are providing, comes up less than the amount required to be adequate, the state does not make you increase the budget to get to adequacy and increase the tax levy, but they prevent you from decreasing the tax levy. So when the calculations were done, the state determined that our proposed tax levy, what they call the expected local share, was $603,000 more than the current year's tax levy. So we became one of those districts that's below adequacy. Now, they're not going to make us raise the tax levy $603,000, but they are going to say to us, your tax levy now is $36,427,095. You may not lower that tax levy under any circumstances. And so we now have a minimum tax levy. Well, the Board Finance Committee asked me to personally review the numbers from the state and check them. And I checked all the state aid data and all the downloads they give you on the budget preparation. The numbers are correct. I was also asked to contact the Office of the Hudson County Superintendent of Schools, and they verified that, yes, that is correct. It is a statutory obligation. It is mandated. The language of the statute says you shall, not you may, and therefore there is no one who can change that except the legislature. Third and finally, I prepared for the board the exact statute in Title 18A, 7F, Section 5, Part D. And the language in that statute is very clear. And the part that's really pertinent I put in bold print. Each district shall have a required local share. The required local share shall equal the lesser of the local share calculated at the district's adequacy budget or the district's local share for the pre-budget year. Each district shall raise a general fund tax levy which equals its local share. And more interestingly, no municipal governing body shall certify a general fund tax levy which does not meet the required local share. What that means, in plain English, is that if the budget were to be defeated and it goes to the town council, they cannot cut the tax levy. It is, in other words, a mandated amount, and it must be raised. There are two other items I've included in the memo for the board. One is a very excellent article I came across on the internet this afternoon, and it's from the Education Law Center. And I had mentioned to the board members when we met in committee to discuss preliminary the budget, and I had mentioned to you that we are now at a state in New Jersey where there are 205 school districts out of the approximately 575 operating districts. It's getting close to 40% of the districts in the state that are now below adequacy. That number is growing. It is 24 more than last year when there were 181. It is expected to continue growing, and one of the principal factors for the reason it is growing is the failure of the state to fully fund the state aid formula, because every year they underfund the state aid formula, there is less spending in those districts, more districts fall below the adequacy level, and in addition to that, the gap between where they are and how far they are for adequacy is growing greater. The other item I've included in the package to the board is a newspaper article from the Bergen Record on February 26th. The master appointed by the Supreme Court to hear the arguments relative to the constitutionality of the state aid cuts held one of its hearings in Hackensack in Bergen County. The gentleman who testified, Mr. Mel Wyans, worked for me in Trenton as the director of state aid. He's a very brilliant gentleman who had over 30 years' experience handling all of the state's state aid information. He testified relative to the impact a cut in aid is having on the ability to reach adequacy and therefore its impact on the constitutionality of the aid cuts. The master's report is due back to the Supreme Court on the 31st of March, and it will be very interesting to see what that decision is. But I wanted the board to have the full impact and all of the information. So you have the law center's position, you have the testimony before the master who's hearing the information, and interestingly enough, the whole argument keys around the large number of districts reaching adequacy. Strangely enough, one of our local Hudson County communities is the worst off in that it is 78% below adequacy. It's listed in the report. We have just crossed into the below adequacy. We're only about 1.6% below adequacy. The other thing I've included with your package is a copy of the actual printouts from the State Department of Education budget documents that I have to transmit online by computer, and you will see in there the adequacy budget. You will see the notice that we are $603,000 below that. You will see what we could have gone up had we gone to the 2% cap. You could have gone up $730,000. But more importantly, I had a little fun with it, and I went back into the program and I took $1 below adequacy, and I entered that, and you see the top of that page. It reads fatal error. It would not even let me transmit the document to the state in that condition. So it's a rather interesting and definitive situation on where we are. And I wanted to lay that information out for the benefit of the public before we get to discussing the budget, because it's the first time we have confronted that. With regard to the budget, the overview that you have, this is not really the public hearing on the budget. The public hearing will be on Tuesday, March 29th at 7 p.m. in this room. And at that time, after the board has had the opportunity to deliberate on the budget over the next 6 weeks, the budget will be advertised, the budget will be in the paper, we will hold a public hearing. While the board may not reduce the tax levy, the board has other options as to where it spends the money, whether it changes line items, how much it appropriates from fund balance. There are other issues to be discussed that are relating to the budget. But as it is now presented as a preliminary budget, I wanted for the public to see first the general overview, which indicates that we are going to propose reducing the spending by about $822,000, which is 1%. Even though the general fund tax levy must by law be frozen, there is a slight decrease of about $3,028 in the debt service tax levy. So for the second year in a row, there will be a decrease in the total levy we have requested from the township, albeit a small one of less than 1%. And finally, in the staffing, there are about 6 staff positions eliminated due to efficiencies in scheduling. We will not have to terminate any individuals because the number of retirements, it looks like, will far exceed that. I wanted, before I got into some more detailed information on the budget, for you to look at the next page, because the budget that we developed last year and the budget that we're beginning to look at for this year, and by this year I mean 11-12, is really stunning when you look at the fact that from February of 2010 until this February, just last month, we have been stripped of $5 million in state aid. In the middle of the 2009-10 school year, February of 2010, after the aid had been certified, after we adopted our budget, after we were 7 months into spending that money, the state took $669,000. They simply said, beginning with the February state aid checks through May, we're going to reduce your state aid. And they said, take your surplus and replace the state aid with that. So I also have footnoted that they cut us $669,000 in state aid for fiscal year 10, and we had to replace that because it was in the middle of the year with surplus. In fiscal year 10-11, when we adopted the budget last year, the state underfunded us by $2,406,000. Our entitlement was $9.4 million. They said, we're going to give you $7 million. And that's the way the state solves part of the state budget problem. In the current year, they did not certify any state aid figures by formula. They simply said, take 1% of your general fund budget, and for us that's 48 of the 60 million. The other 12 million is state and federal grants. And they said, we'll give you 1% of your general fund operating budget. So 1% of 48 million is 480,000. We got certified for an increase of $481,000 in state aid. Assuming that the current year's aid at least would have been equal to last year's in terms of our entitlement, which is, I think, a fair and a conservative assumption, we are, even though we got an increase of $481,000 in aid, we are still underfunded by about $1.925 million. And you can see very easily the damage done in 12 months is $5 million in state aid. This district is, as of today, entitled to by law that we have not gotten and likely will not get. So the budget numbers you see relating to both the reduction in expenses and the flat tax levy in the general fund is really interesting when you put it against the context of the state aid which we lost.